Hey guys, it's Missy. Hope you're having a great summer. Um, we are doing lessons online, so you are my guinea pigs. You are my first one. So, I'm old school and I like pen and paper. So, here we go. Let's see what happens. The first lesson we're going to talk about is the amendments to the Constitution. And if you go back and you think about what we talked about as far as the American Revolution and the uh, Enlightenment, we talked about John Locke, we talked about Montesquieu, all those different things. But the most important one we talked about here that's going to relate to this topic is going to be John Locke. John Locke was the one who said that people were born good and that people were born with rights, their natural rights, life, liberty, those types of things. And if you look at our Constitution, you can see how that is placed in our Constitution. But anyway, as time went on, we had to add amendments to our Constitution because, as we all know, things have changed and events that have happened in history and things like that, they've had to add to make things better. So let's talk about the first 10 amendments, which is the Bill of Rights. The first one was the freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and then you had the right to assemble and the right to petition. And we used SP RAP for that. Remember, there were 3 freedoms and 2 rights. S, speech, R, religion, P for press, and then you had the rights of assembly and petition. So SP RAP, that's the thing we talked about to help you remember that. The next one was the right to bear arms. If you remember, we talked about the 2 bear arms that you had. That's the right for you to own guns and those types of things. That the government cannot take that right away from you unless you're like a convicted felon and things like that. The third one was the housing of soldiers. And remember, we talked about 3 was a crowd, that when you went on a date, you didn't want anybody extra going on your date. You didn't want a third wheel. So if you weren't supposed to be on the date, then you didn't need to be there. So you just had you and your significant other, whatever. So that means that you didn't want anybody extra. And that's what it was basically, of housing of soldiers, that the government could not make you have soldiers living in your home. So that was your right to say no for that. Then you had the 4th Amendment, which was search and seizure. Remember the right that they cannot come in and search your property or any of those things without reasonable cause or without a search warrant. And the way that we remembered that was the 4 syllables, search and seizure, and you could use your 4 knuckles for that one. The 5th Amendment was had to do, I think I used all 5 fingers. Remember, we had you can only be tried once for something. You cannot incriminate yourself, like with double self-incrimination, double jeopardy, eminent domain, which means taking a property. But they have to pay for it, but they still can take your property. Trial by jury or jury of your peers. And then due process, which I think the pinkies was everybody else was doing something, so we're going to add this pinky to it too. So it has due process, so which means basically everybody has to have the same things. Like if they read rights to one person, they have to read rights to the other person, and so forth and so on. The 6th Amendment had to do with fair and speedy trials and public trials, and we remember that speedy had 6 letters in it, and then you also had 6 letters in public, that you have a right to call witnesses, all of those different things, and you can do it before a jury of your peers. The 7th Amendment had to do with civil cases, which basically said that anything that happened over $20, that you could bring it to court, and usually that had to do with land disputes, divorces, those types of things. Anything that was not a criminal case. And I think we use like the VIL, but we really supposed to be like VII to help you with that one. So civil for that, if you looked at your Roman numerals. The 8th one was cruel and unusual punishment. And that was, remember, I used my housewives, Teresa Judices, clink, clink, handcuffs. Remember the 8, sideways, like handcuffs, those types of things. You could use that one for that one. And then you had number 9, saying that there were rights that people had that were not listed in the Constitution. And that, remember we talked about, you can buy any car you want to buy as long as you have the money to pay for it. government cannot tell you where you can live, where you can travel, all those different things. And that's just rights that you have as a citizen. And then number 10 had to do with states' rights. And remember, we talked about how the difference between Mississippi and Alabama. Remember the marriage requirements, driver's license requirements. What we do in Mississippi may not be the same thing that people do in California, or they may not do it in Alabama or Tennessee or whatever. So that was your first 10. The next amendment had to do with 11. When we said one-on-one, remember, you cannot sue a state, an individual cannot sue a state in a federal court. So that would be one-on-one. Then we had 1 and 2, which would be your number 12. Your 12th Amendment had to do with the highest seats in the country, like president and vice president. Up until this time that this one came along, you had where the one that got the most votes was the president. The one that got the second highest votes was vice president. And we talked about how that would have been a teetotal disaster when we talked about Trump and Hillary Clinton trying to run to get to and work together. And that's not going to work. And that would be how that would work today. 13, 14, and 15 all went together. These had to do with the Reconstruction amendments. Set them free, give them rights, let them vote. And this all had to do with the race. So set them free had away with slavery. 14 was giving them rights or civil rights. And then 15, suffrage or voting rights for African Americans or people of other race. 16 had to do with income tax. Remember the X in 16 and X in taxes. And you also remember that at the age of 16, you can get a job and they start taking taxes out of your paycheck. And that's how we remember that one. 17, 18, and 19, we had that quirky little saying, senators get drunk and chase women. Senators being how the people chose their senators or direct election of senators. 18 had to do with prohibition when they outlawed alcohol. Remember, that's the only one that has ever been repealed. 19 had to do with women's suffrage or giving women the right to vote. Remember, that goes back to right after World War I, where women worked during the time to keep the home front going while the men were away fighting in the war. So women believed that they should get the right to vote. 20 had to do with the day of inauguration. We talked about the lame duck, how they didn't like the amount of time that was allowed between election and when the president actually took office or Congress actually took office. So we have January the 20th for the day of inauguration for the president to the 20th Amendment. 21st Amendment, this is when they repealed the 18th Amendment and said that it was okay to manufacture, transport, distribute alcohol. And we know that the legal drinking age is 21, so that helps you remember that. 22 had to do with 2 terms. This is when they started limiting the amount of time that a person could be president. Remember, it can be no more than 10 years. So if they are elected twice, that's 8 years. But if they happen to be like vice president before, they could, anything less than 2 years, they could serve that term also. And this all goes back to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because he was elected 4 terms. 23 in D.C., this gave the people of the District of Columbia, even though it's not a state, that gave them rights to vote in different elections. 2-4 out the door, or 2-4 no more poll taxes. You don't have to pay a tax. Remember, this goes back to our Jim Crow laws, where they wanted to make sure that certain people couldn't vote. And so this did away with poll taxes. 2-5, staying alive. Talked about the president and talked about if he became incapacitated, who would take over and all those different things, like the vice president would be, and then you'd have the Speaker of the House. But it all had to do with the disability of the president. 26, remember 2 plus 6 equal 8. And then we have teen. That helps with 18-year-olds getting the right to vote. And this is back in like 1970, 71. You had 18-year-old guys going to Vietnam to fight in the war, but they could not vote in their country. They could buy cigarettes, but they could not vote. So this push for 18-year-olds to get the right to vote. And then 2-7, I'm in heaven. Senators get the right to raise their salaries, but remember that's when They can't do it during the term in which they're serving. It has to be after that term is over. So, sorry, grandchildren. 2-7. Remember, I'm in heaven. Senators can't raise their pay unless they they can do it after their term is over. So, if you got your packet, there should have been a handout in there that was a review of the amendments worksheet. There, I think in the other handout packets that you'd gotten in the past, there was a list of those amendments. But, and this is going to be backwards because you know I don't know how to do anything. But anyway, in your packet, you have this one here. And it, like the first 23 questions has to do with the Bill of Rights. Remember, that's 1 through 10. And you are supposed to go through and write down the number that represents the amendment that this pertains to here. Like in the first one, you have the right not to be put on trial twice for the same crime. And remember, that has to do with double jeopardy. Remember my Tommy Lee Jones movie, Double Jeopardy, where the lady kills her husband, but she can't stand trial again because she's already been convicted of that crime and served the time. So that would be one. So you would put 5 in that blank. You go on down, that's 1 through 23. And then for amendments 11 through 27, you have questions 24. I'm having to look, y'all. 24 through 40. That happen, you would do basically the same thing there. You put 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, whatever. And the first one you have there says a citizen cannot be denied the right to vote because of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This amendment protected the right of black male citizens to vote. And when it goes back to your Reconstruction amendments, set them free, give them rights, let them vote. 13, 14, 15. So you would put 15 in that blank. Okay. If you flip, when you get through with 40, you have 2 other questions which are a little bit more detailed. It says, in your opinion, what are the 5 most important rights and freedoms listed in the Bill of Rights? So those questions are going to pertain to 1 through 10. You have to write more than just the amendment number. You've got to tell why or tell what the amendment stands for. And then number 2 says, which 5 amendments are not included in the Bill of Rights, which would be 11 through 27. Do you consider to be the greatest importance? Give the number and the reason why you chose it. Do you think it is most important that you can't be tried twice for the same crime? Do you think it's not fair for them to charge you huge amounts of bail for some menial crime? You know, or should they be able to throw you in jail and lock the door and not get you to ever get out again for some small crime that you've ever committed? Do you think it has to fit the crime? Okay. Do you think it's fair that 18-year-olds got the right to vote? I think that would be an important one. I mean, some of you are going to be 18 years old before long, and it's going to be important that you want to vote. That's your civil right or it's your duty as an individual to vote, cast your vote. Then, because if you don't have the right to say anything negative about what's going on because you didn't voice your opinion. And that way of voting is your way of voicing your opinion. But those are some different things that you could do to go along with the amendments. I know I keep moving the screen. It's crazy, isn't it? Don't y'all laugh because you know I'm a disaster. Just a disaster. Those of you who might have had Mr. Lytle or Coach Crotwell and you look at this, I know that you had gotten packets. I know especially Mr. Lytle's class. You got a packet in the previous ones that had the amendments listed, and those can help you go through those and look at these and help you try to answer this questions that goes along with this amendments handout. If you get lost or stuck, you can always go on to Quizlet. Any of those different things, you can Google the different things, and it can help you answer any of those questions. So, I hope this jarred your memory about your amendments. They're very, very, very important. You are a citizen of the United States, and these are things that you own these. You have the right to any of these things. So you need to make sure that you know your rights as an individual. If you get stuck, just go through them and see if you can figure them out. And you can always Google it later and see if you got it right or not. Going back to summer, hope you're having a great summer. Look forward to seeing you in the fall. Hope we get to see each other in the fall and go back to normal, because this is a crazy, crazy time right now. So have a great summer. Miss you guys. See you later.